Hello everyone and welcome to the most sluggish game dev podcast in the world, House of Games. Today I'm joined by my host Odo and a very special guest, Mireneye. But before I give you the word, mister, let us kick back that door and enter this week's episode of House of Games.
Welcome everyone to the House of Games, and I think without much further ado I would like to give the word to our guest. So would you like to tell us who are you and what do you do?
Well, first, thank you for this opportunity. It's great to be here. My name is Mireneye and I'm working on a let's call it dark action RPG, and let's not call it something inspired by Demon's Souls or Dark Souls. But even though that might have been one of the core inspirations way back in 2010 or 9 or something. As for about me, I played games since I was a kid and I always enjoyed and loved that. And since 2004 was it, I started modding games, and it's all slowly is always converging towards making something out of my own, which I have since roughly 2011.
So have you worked on this game since 2011 or different games?
The timeline is a bit convoluted, but in 2011 I started writing the lore for what was supposed to be a pen and paper RPG setting for me and some friends. And in 2014 is when actual production started of a game in Unreal Engine. That pen and paper setting never came to be, well, at least it hasn't come to be. But I love the ideas.
Is that lore still in the game, the pen and paper idea?
I would say maybe 40% of what was written originally, maybe. And then some ideas were just really good and stuck with me, and some of them have developed over time and changed. So
yeah, so that is a long time. So starting chronologically, would you tell us about the game that you are developing? How did it start, and the sort of timeline of how you got to where we are now and what that sort of means?
Right. Well, when I was starting, even earlier really, sometime in late 2011, maybe early 2012, I was looking at game engines and I was trying out Unity. I was working on another project with some people that never came to fruition, but it was called Salt Mountain. And at that point, I was just learning a little bit about Unity because I just needed some experience. And then I wasn't quite happy with what I was able to do aesthetically with Unity. It felt limiting at the time. Back then, Unity was a whole different beast. And I haven't looked much at Unity recently, but it seems mostly more solid, even though the recent developers being all up in the air about things recently is concerning. But it, as a software, it's more fully fledged now than it was back then, and that's at least what I feel. Because I think that's important to know, is that I have a more artistic background than I have a programmer background, even though I understand code somewhat well. I can look at things and I can mess around with it a little bit, write some things on my own.
Are you self-taught?
Yeah, well, I did go to 3 years of IT/programming school, high school stuff, but I still feel as if as a foundation, that's not a super strong foundation, right? So much changes all the time, and if you don't keep that stuff fresh, it's and if you don't keep going right afterwards, it's
Yeah, totally agree.
It's some idea of it, but not the most solid foundation. So in terms of the timeline, I got more inspired once that project started dying down a little bit because it sort of ran out of money. That wasn't my project at all. It was something else I was doing. That project was running out of steam, so to speak. I was okay, I'm going to look into Unreal Engine. And this is back in version 4.14. So it's still pretty early and it's still a little bit buggy and crashy and shit. But that's when I started mapping out the worlds and figuring out all of the tools that exist in Unreal Engine. And that's still a journey because every other day I realized there's some feature that I didn't know about or didn't use. Yeah.
So what was the idea for the game to begin with? What was your sort of your vision of what it would be before you started making it?
This is a great question, actually. It's morphed a lot from the pen and paper part. I had like a preset idea of some characters that you would like assume, like background packages basically, and then you sort of would take those along with you as you take those along as the backdrop for your characters that you then develop, sort of writing on the idea that you're not like a clean slate in the world. You have a history in the world to root it perfectly in there. And then as it was changing into a game for a while, the ideas circulated around like, okay, I felt like I wanted you to be able to start in different areas and different places in the world as like a randomly placed sort of thing and more randomized experience sort of. But along the development line, I also realized that for like a tutorialization purpose, just starting someone off in a random area it comes with its own design difficulties, let's say. So we decided to like have like a static starting area and then opportunities to branch out from there, so to speak.
You mentioned before that it's not a Souls-like game, or we should avoid calling it a Souls-like, more like an action RPG. But what I played so far, I'm a huge Soulborn player. I got the vibes anyway that it is that kind of inspired by those games in one way or another. So I did have a question about the story. Like, I mean, if it's not that type of game, like the full thing, then ignore this question. But I was just kind of curious because those games, the story is sort of told by reading books and all that stuff. They don't really have cutscenes, or is it the same in this game? Like, how do you learn about the world? Is it environmental storytelling, or do you also pick up items and read about it?
Well, we have like one of our strongest design pillars is exploration and fucking around and finding out, if I can say so. So like it has a lot to do with like natural curiosity, and the ways we work with that is we have a codex that we update when you find certain things in the world. We also have like some like item descriptions, although we lean on them a bit for storytelling, but tastefully so, I would say, in a way where like, I'm a man who likes obscurity, so like I'll scatter these points around a little bit. It's going to be a journey piecing those things together for sure. But then also it's very important to just look at the world. Environmental storytelling feels like a bit of a buzzword, but we take great care to think of a thing's placement in the world, so that it makes sense, at least in the context of Dynasthir. It doesn't necessarily always make sense in the context of another world, like our world. So following the ideas and laws and physics of this world.
You say we. How many people are working on this game?
I was gonna ask exactly the same question in the exact same way, I think.
Yeah, we're two like active developers who put in a lot of time into it, and then it's currently like two composers who help us out every time with like sound design and stuff like that.
Cool.
So they don't work, maybe the work they do is phenomenal, but they also have other things that they're doing.
Interesting. And has it been two people like doing it mainly for most of the time, or has that shifted?
Well, it's actually mostly been me up until 2018, I think. So I had 4 years in relative, like, just me not telling anyone. Like, most of my close friends didn't know I was working on it.
Damn.
I just wanted to, like... I wanted the idea to be substantial enough that it's not just like some random ass idea. I wanted people to take me seriously, I guess, back then. Be like, okay, I'm doing this. I'm making this big game. I still get that sometimes when I feel like I'm approaching, partnership deals with publishers and things, is that I present the game and I think it has an intimidating size to it.
How far from completion are you with the game? Or is it playable from start to finish?
The first chapter is playable. That's the one we like hand out to you guys.
Yeah.
There's a few nicks and knacks about that, but that's always the case, I think. As for how close we are to finishing it, well, it's a tricky question, but we finished basically all of the systems early this summer, or not early this year. We sort of like wrapped up on basically all of the systems we need to complete the game. I have said so at least before, but I do need to backtrack that a little bit because the quest system we're using is not getting any support, and there is a very game-breaking sort of like bug that has to be fixed. So I've looked at what we can do instead. So I might have to like switch gears on that a little bit. But in terms of if I backpedal a little bit to answer your question, in terms of like content that has to be produced, we have like chapter 0 that has like most of it, the main quest sort of content, right? As for the other, there's 3 other chapters is what I want to say. So now it's really just mostly straightforward bug fixing and content creation.
Now that's a nice hurdle to overcome. I'm almost there myself on my current game. Like I have this one pickle to unpickle, and then I feel like if I pull that off and make the load and save function work, I feel like it's going to be quite smooth sailing, just create graphics and content, like the fun stuff, if you will. But I'm also curious, speaking of graphics, is it like assets flips in this game, or have you guys made everything yourself, or how does it work when you work with Unreal?
Well, I'm not going to shy away from the idea that we use a lot of assets from asset packs and stuff like that. But the main, I have to like basically like review most of the things we get anyways. Like they help with time, but we still have to like basically, because every like asset pack will have its own shader, right? There's always some variety in how they pack the textures and everything. And if you want to be efficient about that, you sort of have to like process that somehow. And even more so for Dynasthir, it's a very big world, and we load a lot of the stuff up front. As I think one of you noticed in your playthrough, it's like the first load can be a very long one. So we load a lot of stuff up front because I want to sort of simulate lots of the world at the same time. If that makes any sort of sense. So we do use a lot of assets. I make a bunch of things on my own as well. Whenever we need like a customized thing, it's also like, you know, that thing where you take something that you already have as an asset, like you got from some pack somewhere, and you just like make some variations. I would say there's a lot of that. The same goes for like, we do that on every level really, both with like sound and animation and everything. Animation we look at as one of the most important parts, I think, to like distinguish ourselves so that it doesn't feel like it moves like everything else. And as for the overall aesthetic in the game, that's like where I come in with like just tweaking values, changing a texture here or there. A lot of it is just generalizing it because, like I said, it's a big world. So to get it to be performant, we do need to like optimize everything in particular ways. I realized basically that on a indie level, there are almost no open worlds made in Unreal Engine. So there's like almost no information out there. You can find information about how to build an open world weather system, how to build an open world this system. But then if you start looking at all of those components together, it's like none of that will work performantly, like together. Like if you put it all together, it's like, yeah, this is not performance. And that's something we're realizing, that like it's not necessarily new territory, but it's mostly touched by AAA industry. And even that is like 10, 20 actual like open worldly titles that actually like are made in Unreal Engine. So that's pretty ridiculous, I think, to think that it almost feels like a new field in a way. Not that we're programming anything that's like an amazing piece of programming. I'm not saying that, but it's interesting that like I can't really just go anywhere and find tutorials anymore. I have to sit down and really think about things.
Yeah, that sounds, that's hardcore stuff. But do you guys use the latest Unreal Engine at this point? I mean, you keep updating it.
We're on 4. we're actually at 4.26. And the reason why is that I tried updating to both 4.27 and 5 a few times by now. And every time, even if I sit down and tick some boxes and turn off some settings or switch out some of the stuff, I don't feel like I get as smooth of a performance out of them. And for Unreal Engine 5, it's because it's more CPU bound. With all, like, that's at least what it seems like to me, that there's more stuff going on that makes it heavy for the CPU. Of course, all the lumens and everything will take its toll, but when I turn those down, all the lumen and nanites and everything, so the GPU is like evened out, it's still more heavy.
More boilerplate then, I guess.
Maybe. I'm not actually like 100% certain. There might be things I don't know about that I don't understand, like this is a thing you can turn off or this is a thing you can tweak. It's always like the possibility that there's like a lack of knowledge somewhere. But 4.27 ran faster, but there's nothing in 4.27 that we need. So the extra overhead isn't really worth it to like really go into it and make that proper. So 4.26 is probably going to be the thing we keep until release, and then we might make some special version that is running with 5 down the road and like see if we can get the new lighting and other effects like loaded in properly with that. But that's post-release stuff. It's we can decide more what to do with that once we reach that goalpost, so to speak.
It sort of sounds like I never made an open world myself, but it sounds like you could literally have the whole world ready, and then after the fact you can start tweaking stuff to get a better performance. And I guess it will work kind of like prefabs throughout the world. So you tweak this, I don't know, this tree, it shouldn't move as much or whatever, and then that will apply to all the trees in the world, and then you get a little bit better performance out of it, and then you can keep tweaking until you get a great performance. But what's the, like, you said it felt heavy on the latest Unreal. Is it because of your computer, or is it, what is the heavy feeling there? Or, I mean, wouldn't you want it to be...
Well, let's put it into perspective. If I loaded the entire map and I turned off all of the like settings that would add GPU overhead, so to speak, that would add like some weight to that, to the GPU, I go from running 60 on a map to running 20 FPS. That's ridiculous. So I'm assuming part of that is there's some setting that I'm not understanding, and part of it I think is that there is something about this is a big theory, but part of something about the conversion process doesn't work out that well. Like if you start a new project, maybe it will just run better. But since it is an old project getting converted, that might have something to do with why it's running so slow.
Okay.
But big theory. I have had other people who have relatively big projects who tried moving over, and they've had issues with their projects as well. While people starting out seem to have a little bit easier time, maybe. But then again, people starting out haven't typically gotten as far in terms of like this sheer amount of stuff they have. So, yeah, jury's out on this one, unfortunately.
So, could you give us just so it's clear, I'm not sure if we have presented it, but just give us the title of the game and an elevator pitch so that everyone is in the loop for what the game is and what to expect when it's released.
Yeah, let's get everyone in on the game loop.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. So, Dynasthir is a Dark Ages-inspired third-person action RPG with an obscure world and deadly kinetic combat, fueled by adrenaline.
Cool.
That's the pitch for it. And as you were mentioning earlier as well, that the reason I joke about like not Dark Souls or Demon Souls is because once you slap those things on it, there's a whole slew of expectations. It's certainly like an action RPG in that sense, but I also want it to be judged on its own merit. I feel that there's enough to differentiate it and stand out from the crowd of those games on its own. and have its own qualities, so to speak.
But does it have that punishing gameplay like those types of games?
Yes.
Okay, interesting.
So what happens if you die? Do you lose everything and start over, or how punishing?
There's 4 types of currencies, and the only one that you actually lose is the one called essence.
Okay, so what does that currency do, or how do you get it?
So essence is used for both like sort of leveling up, like spending it in a skill tree essentially is what you do with it, or you use it to like purchase things inside of the game. So going to like a vendor and doing some trades. However, vendors will also trade other currencies, and there's 3 others. So those 3 other ones is something that the player doesn't lose. You'll find those like scatter across the world. You'll get them from doing various tasks and interacting, so to speak, with the world.
Cool. So what are the other currencies, and why do you have multiple?
So one part of why there's multiple is to be able to pace out the skill tree. So say you have these like, I don't know if you're familiar, but like they're like highways almost in a skill tree. So like you have all these small roads, if you think about them as like roads and stuff, and you have highways. So to access a highways, it's more convenient instead of like dividing up points and saying like, oh, this costs 20 points and this costs 40 points. Instead, we have different currencies. So bloodline shards, for instance, are much more rare than essence to find in the world, but they will unlock some of those highways.
That sounds nice. I mean, it sounds like an extra level of excitement when you find them and all that. Like,
yeah, that's absolutely intended for it to be that way. The other reason is because they also have this intrinsic like idea of how the world works. You have a piece of chroma, which is anything that carries a potent color. Chroma lives, like all of these elements are like tied to the underlying physics of the game, I guess. The physics of the world, that is. So chroma would be color, essence is sort of like a life forcey thing. Your bloodline shards is the physical manifestation, I guess, of life force, more or less. And then you have AO, which is basically like an emanation, like an aura, essentially.
have you, at this stage, are there any bosses in the game?
The demo that you guys have access to have 3 bosses.
Oh, interesting.
Very interesting.
I would say that one of them is very like complete. There's another one that's sort of like 70 or 80% way there, and then this one that maybe like 65-70% there of being like fully like complete. But they're all quite playable.
Very cool.
As for like the complete, actually I can't really reveal the complete like roster of bosses, but there's a few in the works at least, and if chapter 0, which this is anything to judge by that having like 3 bosses in the space of that area, playable space, then you can sort of imagine the numbers.
Are these bosses asset flips, or have you made them yourselves, like the design and everything?
2 of them are self-made.
Cool. I look forward to run into them.
And the third one is some variation on an armored guy that we don't really need to reinvent armor.
Right. And you mentioned previously that it's kinetic combat, I think you said. So what does that mean?
So kinetic to me means that it's, very... kinetic is such a good word, but like I think of touch when I think kinetic, and I think like you feel the impact is what I want to say. So that's like one of those important part of like... Actually, since this is like a for game developer podcast sort of like deal here, let's get a bit technical because that's always fun. So I had super fun with this. So you guys know what hit stop is, right?
Yes, I think so.
Yeah. So for a quick primer on hit stop, it's essentially is freezing a frame for a fraction of time to like sell an impact. Right.
Right.
So I went pretty deep down the rabbit hole with hit stop, and I think we have some value coming out of that. So as different weapons make impacts, we are modulating time in sort of like an interesting way where where there is the perceived thickness of the object you're hitting, right? You have an idea of like, okay, you have an impact and then there's resistance, right? So you have a moment where you have a freeze frame, and then you have like some resistance where time is essentially running a bit slower. And then to contrast that slower time, we're actually speeding up the time of the game just for a smidgen of a few frames post passing through the object, essentially. So that was me watching like some Street Fighter video and being like, it almost looks like it moves faster after they hit the characters. And I think that might be tied to animations in those games, but like I was like, you know what I can do with like hit stuff. So we actually have a curve sort of thing where we're like, I have a paper on this that I wrote down, like is to have it on there, but it's like this is the actual peak of the stop, and this is like the resistance part of the curve, and then there's like this post speed up, and then it comes down. So it all like modulates over like this curve as you are hitting the enemy.
Cool.
Very cool.
I think Final Fantasy X, have a really good, which is weird because it's turn-based, but I remember feeling it's, maybe because it was the DualShock vibrating, but I really felt like it was impact when Auron in particular, when it hit the enemies. It was a nice feeling. And I like that games that have that impact feeling. Final Fantasy VII Remake, I feel like is pretty good at it. I just played it, but I don't remember it. Yeah, but that's nice you guys pay so much attention to that, because I think that adds a lot of value, or it's just very neat when it works.
Yeah, up until recently we had an issue where like the combat felt jittery, and for a while I thought it had something to do with that, but it ended up having to do with the lock-on, which is ridiculous. But the lock-on was just updating at too high frequency with like no smoothness, so it felt weird when you were hitting like an enemy, and then there's like a knockback on the enemy that's really fast or something, and the camera would just jerk alongside, and that felt really bad. But now it feels really smooth again.
Nice.
Cool. So which part of the game, so I'm assuming bits of everything, since you worked on this game yourself for quite a while, but what parts of the game do you do currently, or which parts do you like? Is it only programming, or do you do also art, or also music, or what kind of parts are sort of your favorites, and what do you have to do, so to speak?
I like to call myself a tech artist, although I have so much to learn about the process still. Like I'm still learning a lot about like math and stuff, and not like necessarily actively learning, but just going through the motions when the challenges appear before me. I thoroughly enjoy having like a problem that needs a solution, in terms of like just, okay, there's something here about aesthetics that we want to achieve, and the technical side that has to happen to get that to work. So I'd like to say that like I find the most joy in doing tech artwork, like improving the shader workflow and like things like that, and trying to figure out how to make things run better. It's always like a joy whenever I find like another like neat like particle shader trick or whatever, or like a way to like some values to tweak and make it like look better, be prettier, and run faster. Like look better and be faster. Aside from that, I think like I do a lot of like level design work. My style is more of like since we're two working on the game, my style is very much like I splotch some things down, place them around until the composition feels right, and then my friend Wolfgang and my friend Akoda, he usually comes in and be like, I'm gonna place this plant like this, and then I place this plant like this, and like some of the finer detail work. He hasn't like gone through all the old stuff yet, but sometimes you can just walk out somewhere and be like looking at a plant and being like, yeah, that plant is perfectly like placed along the rocks.
Mm-hmm. Do you do what's that thing I don't do, or I always talk about it?
Proceduralism? No?
Draw stuff before you actually make them.
Concept art.
Concept art. Do you do concept art for your worlds, or do you just go into this 3D world in Unity and start building them?
In Unreal, usually that's what it is. I usually map it out in Unreal, I sort of like, I think I skip over some of the gray boxing because I know intrinsically sort of what the character can do. And I also sort of know intrinsically like sort of what the high end is of that. So I sort of skip over a bunch of the gray boxing sequence that a lot of people other like to do. I do draw some things on paper sometimes, just when I have like, okay, so there's this puzzly piece or environmental piece that like I need an idea of like how that is supposed to work or what the flow of the level is, so to speak. I actually have an entire like, not entirely, it's like 2 pages I think of like, for when the opportunity comes of like working with other people, I'm like, here's how I built the world and how I imagined working. And one of the quotes from that world is that this world is not made for a player, right? It's not made for you specifically. So it has a sense of hostility in that, like, the space isn't necessarily like, it's a natural space in the same way that you wouldn't just like jump off a cliff somewhere, or like you wouldn't just like jump into like a place full of spikes, right? Like a cavern that has like strange edges and shit. So there's a lot of like things that we allow to naturally be in the world, and that's a very strange thing to design with.
It could also be like, let's say I see this gap between 2 a hill, and there's like an alley between them, and I from a distance I think I can jump over that gap, but once I get there I can't. So that would be like an example of where it is just naturally the way, like you can't jump over this, even though you would think that, because if, like you said, if you make it for the player, then it would be obviously, oh, I should be able to jump over there or whatever.
Yeah, there's obviously places where we design experiences that is meant to be like a thing that you experience as you go through the world. But the world at large, so to speak, the things that you find outside of those spaces is not necessarily always for the player, and we give the player enough tools to, at least towards later parts of the game, like think about that cliff, right? And be like, okay, maybe I can jump that now, later in the game, right? And even if not everything has like an extrinsic reward there, something that you can like latch on to, then at least you're like, oh yeah, I did scale that. And we actually have a quite fantastic little gameplay system that I'm not super vocal about because I like people to experience it on their own, but it actually enforces exploration in a pretty interesting way. Without revealing what exactly it is, I can say that there are ways for you to create shortcuts inside of the world, in the gameplay space.
Cool.
So once you find those cliffs, and once you do get across them or find some interesting place, you can make your journeys and connect the world in a different way for your own enjoyment.
I wanted to ask, you said the players should find these things themselves, like, how many people are playing the game now? Like how, I mean, it's sort of like an early beta testing, or yeah, like how do you have like a small community, or who's playing the game?
Right now we had like a play testing session some months ago, early in the year, I believe. And then as it is right now, we're just mostly targeted like sending it out to people, seeing who wants to like cover it a little bit, etc. Just trying to reach out to some people. We have in our Discord community, I think there's 60 people. Goes up and down in activity a little bit now and then.
I saw that our friend Switchheads played it on his stream the other day, actually.
Ah.
So I think we'll link to that stream as well in the description so people can get a glimpse of it.
He's gonna like make a video and compromise like together some of his thoughts and actually catch, because he wasn't able to find a boss fight during his playtime, and so he's going to put that as well in a video.
Cool.
So that's also something to look forward to. He had an interesting journey through the game, certainly. We have some really good takeaways from that, because he has a particular way of going through an experience and breaking it down. So I think that we got a lot of value out of that, because he plays it in a different way from, like, I think I've never seen anyone like sort of play it like that. So what stood out to me, for instance, was that the secrets that we have in the demo available for people, he somehow tended to like walk past those, and he found some secrets that are for final. Like they're not like the space exists in the demo, although there is no secret there right now, which I think is hilarious.
It's cool. So how much feedback have you got from this playtesting session? That must be pretty neat to get some feedback. And
yeah, we have a lot of good feedback. This demo, we try not to mess around with the demo itself so much. We try to patch the things that like we have to, so that we don't have to keep switching gears between the versions. But yeah, we have a few things that have cropped up since the last update where we just hadn't thoroughly play tested exactly everything. But to answer your question in earnest, it's invaluable. Like, I can't overstate how good it is to have some people who are like ready to like jump in and try it out. And we've been lucky enough that we've been able to follow many of those journeys and like just thoroughly follow up on them and be like there with them, or like sit down with them, or like be in the stream with them. But when we first released the demo out there to like our community, we had like sometime over the course of a few days, like some peak of like 15 people playing it at the same time. And at that point it was like, okay, we're gathering data, but it's like we can't like be there actively, like, and I was patching things like crazy because I want people to have a good experience.
Nice.
So how applicable would you say that the feedback is? So would you say that most of it is stuff that you can use and that will improve the game, or is it that there are also some feedback that are hard to apply to something real, or it's something that sort of misses the point, or something like that? Do you have only everything is very helpful, or is it also that you get some comments that are like, I don't know, I want a horse in the game, or something that's just, you can't make use of it?
Yeah, the most fun anecdotal thing I have about this is that Dynasthir hits some notes of being very whimsical sometimes, yet very dark. Like very early in the like tutorialized area, there's quite some small interesting details that are quite whimsical. So what happens is that people take that and they love those whimsical ideas, and sometimes they're like, I'll mention something that was like a previous design that I thought was just too ridiculous, like the other day where I mentioned that at one point you could like ride the salamander, right? Because there's a big salamander somewhere in the demo, and it was like a really scuff like implementation, and I was like, it was just over the course of a day, like I had this ridiculous idea and then I just threw it away. And then I mentioned that as a fun trivia, and people are like, you gotta make that. And I'm like, because then I feel like I have a responsibility to those people to give them something, but at the same time I can't really spend too much time with that. I want to, but I have to like somewhere choose those whimsical elements that I do want in the final game and experience. But rest assured, there will be whimsical things, and well, I'm gonna say this to every like person who likes salamanders. there are some funny salamanders. So like even if you maybe can't ride them, they're out there. I think you'll enjoy them.
Cool.
Another side example, I had a design on paper for a monster. I'm not going to reveal what name it was, but it's a really ridiculous name that has something to do with a Swedish word. And I mentioned that on Discord as a throwaway thing, and the response was just so overwhelmed that I'm like, okay, I gotta make that now.
Interesting. I wanted to ask, you touched on a little bit before in this episode about approaching publishers and so on. Are you still approaching different publishers, or do you have a deal with anyone, or?
We don't have any deal currently with anyone. We're always looking for the opportunities as they come to us, although finding the good opportunities is definitely like a difficult thing. I would say we're privileged in a way where my point of view was always, I'm gonna finish this, like no matter like really the time or the effort that that it takes for me personally. But of course, you have like, if you think about the triangle of like, you have time and resources and what is it, time, resources, and people, something, then I have time. I don't necessarily have a lot of people or resources. So that's the one I can work with, is time. And I'm alright with things taking time, even though like, obviously I'm aiming to for this to not be like a project that takes an eternity. So to answer your question, right now there's nothing really on the table in terms of deals. We have some things, some people who are just interested in like investing some money in the company.
Oh, nice.
So that's always something. These are just like people that I have learned to know over like the course of a long time. So they're, in that sense, the like best business partner you can have, and in some sense the worst in terms of like
pressure.
If they're friends, you don't want to sour your friendship with them, right? So things are still gonna have to be done on paper, of course, to avoid stuff like that.
Do you work on this game full time yourself, or do you have another job on the side?
Right now, I'm doing something else entirely. I ended up in a let's say bad financial situation, so I sort of had to like pedal back a little bit and be like, okay, I gotta like get some things going. So right now I'm actually just recently got hired as a waiter at a restaurant, Brenlands Värdshus.
Oh, that's a very good one.
Yeah, it has a good reputation. And it's a really fancy place, and I like the establishment. I love giving people experiences, and I think that's true whether if I'm doing something on a stage, or if I'm doing a game, or if I'm at like being a waiter, right? So I'd say there's some consistency to my character and my character traits. If you have a character sheet, it's on there.
So you work full time there, and then you work on your game in the evenings or weekends or whenever you find time.
Yeah. Previously, it's been something like, I work 70%, and then I put probably 70% into the game. Now it's probably a little bit less currently until I'm back. Like right now, I'm also living like between like friends and stuff. So until that living situation stabilizes, it's probably going to be a little bit low end for a while. But incidentally, right now, a lot of people are like reaching out to want to stream the game, and we have good time to just do these things. So that is also such an incredibly like important aspect to it. So it's incidentally kind of good that I don't have time to sit down and do hardcore development, because I can do a lot of planning.
Yeah, I try to sit a couple of hours every Monday with like making vlogs or screenshots or whatever. I just hate every second of it. So what you like, the situation you're in now, because I feel exactly the same thing, like, I shouldn't sit here and make a fucking video about my game. I want to make the game. But when you find yourself in that situation, it's almost perfect timing, that you can spend time with the streams and promote the game and all that stuff, get some intel and feedback and all that stuff, and then when you can go back to it, like work on the game more, you have a lot of things to go through. So that's pretty sweet.
Yeah, and you mentioned, so I think one thing that I also have struggled with my game development is that something that you mentioned previously, that you have ideas that you want to implement, but implementing it would like require 2 months work for something that might just be a fun thing, but not really essential. It's not more important than actually finishing the core part of the game. And you mentioned also that you have a Discord with users there that give you feedback and stuff. So how big of a community do you have there?
Well, like I mentioned, it's roughly 60 people, and activity goes up and down a little bit. We have at least one person who absolutely like adores the experience of this game. He's spent probably more time than me playing, like not playing it, but like if you look at the Steam hours played, it's probably played more than I have.
Cool.
Which I think is fun. He keeps coming up with like good memes and stuff, and shares it with the community and everything. I feel like at some threshold you find like a few of those people, and that keeps the community really alive and going. But it's I would say we're pretty blessed, like, to have like these like 60 people who feel like genuinely like engaged, even though like they have like many other things going on in their life. That's about the width of the active community. Wish lists right now stand at about 110, I believe. So that's a humble start. We believe that also because of a good number of like the people who have like the game on our Discord can't wishlist it until like we revoke those keys, and because right now they have the game, right? So it's one of those things. So like we have a little small bump there as well in terms of users.
Do you promote the game like weekly or something, like on Twitter or Reddit and so on?
We haven't really got any like content engine started, so...
Well, you're doing it now.
Yeah, yeah. So what we're trying to do, I think, is go more directly to like different streamers and try to reach out and get like that type of coverage. Surely we could like share pictures and things.
Well, you should watch the episode we did with Yahya, or how you pronounce his name. Sorry if I butchered it. But we did an episode about vlogs and sort of marketing your game that way, doing development vlogs. So I recommend that. And also the things you do, Rune, which is very, if you'll excuse the expression, but low effort, but high effect maybe. That you just hit record, just do some stuff for 5 minutes and just talk about it, and then that's it. But still, it sort of gives you an idea about the game, I think.
Yeah, he did. He edits his stuff really well. I just record myself while I'm working on it, or when I do some of the art stuff, because I find it fun myself to watch other people do these sort of fast forward things when they create art. So I do that, and then I just talk over it. So there's a little bit of editing, of course, but I don't spend. Maybe I spend 1 hour tops for one of these videos, editing and putting it out there. But like I said, I really hate this part of the indie life. So low effort, but yeah. It still works.
Yeah, I mean, I guess that's important if what you want to do is spend time doing what you really love doing, and which actually at the end turns out to be like better for the game, right? So that all I think makes sense, especially like on an indie scale. One of the reasons that I keep coming back to is that I want the experience to be as fresh as possible for as many people as possible, and that sort of goes diametrically like on the other opposite spectrum of like marketing, right? Where it's like, show off the coolest shit you have, and I'm like, I don't want to show that. like I like my secrets.
Yeah. With my Knife Boy game, I feel like I showed off everything in that 1 minute trailer, but it's just the shitty reality if you try to make it interesting. I don't know if it paid off in the end. I could have probably kept a lot of it. It didn't sell well anyway, so. But it's just, maybe some people, oh, this looks cool, and then they pick it up and give it a go. But yeah, it's difficult to balance that.
I think what we sort of land on is like, we can show some of the things that are expected from like the sort of genre or sort of direction that we're going in, and that will get the general mass who likes those sort of things going, and then capitalize like on the differences as you're like experiencing the game.
Yeah.
But it's but that could totally mess with like player expectations. So it's a really tricky like balance act, I think.
But I think there should be some sort of middle ground where you could show off some stuff but still keep some mystery. Like make cliffhangers or something, or you could just work on a small piece where you won't be able to see the whole picture, and you won't know where this little piece belongs to the rest of the game unless you played it, but it still entices you to want to know more.
Yeah, you mentioned the shark gif I updated. It doesn't explain anything.
Yes, exactly like that one. So tell the viewers about that thing.
Well, it's just like you're on a boat, and then from underneath the boat, a big shark come and eat you and the boat. And based on what kind of game it is, I mean, this is like a Stardew Valley, Animal Crossing type of game. I like to call it a mini open world. So it's a very small world, but packed with stuff. And that thing there with the shark, that's like one of those things that probably very few people will experience when they play a game. But it adds some of the mystery. That was it was unintentional, though. It's not until you pointed it out, Odo, where I'm like, actually that kind of works. Like I'm showing something from the game, but it leaves a lot of question marks. Like, at what point is this gonna happen? How does it happen? And all that stuff. Like, it's a mini open world, so the world is quite small. But I am intending to only show certain parts of the island to keep it as secret as possible. The rest of the game. I mean, when you play the game, you can probably run through the island in 5 minutes, but still, I don't want to show off too much. So all the functions that I show in my vlogs, they will probably take place in the same areas to keep it fresh for players. If they like what they see and pick up the game later on, they obviously should have some surprises there.
To that point about that video, so the video was actually about you made a sort of a cipher, I think you call it, like a fake alphabet where certain characters represents different real characters, and that was what it was about. But like the first 5 seconds was that image of that shark eating the player, and then you switched to the rest of the video without like even acknowledging that happened. So that made you sort of curious, like, oh my god, does that happen in the game, or how do you get there? And I think doing something like that is something that I think would be really effective. Something that I also thought of is you could do it in another way, some sort of marketing that maybe gets people interested without showing off anything about the game. So I think it was the commercials for Halo 3, where they just had sort of imagine a toy soldier model, except it was of a Halo 3 battle, and then you had someone dressed up like a war veteran talking about sort of like Band of Brothers, and they talked about some scenario where like the player would save them or something, like Halo 3 would be a war documentary or something like that. And it didn't show any of the gameplay for the games, and those were just amazing trailers that really got you into the world without even seeing what it looks like. So that's also one option. I have to link it in the description. Really amazing trailers.
Yeah. Maybe you can dress up as a knight and go out in the forest, Mireneye. Or like, I don't know, sit and read from a book like a storyteller and have some candlelights in the back and read some lore.
It's great you actually mentioned this part about the storyteller. There is a encompassing theme. We can start it in this end of the story, but the company name is Twin Lake Minstrels, and Twin Lake Minstrels is actually a faction inside of the game, and they are storytellers who are supposed to know every story that exists.
Cool.
So they basically travel the world collecting stories, songs, like wherever contains like a word or a thing that can be interpreted to be some transformative idea of like a plot, so to speak. So that's encompassing, and of course that becomes a part of the meta, is that we are a company of Twin Lake Minstrels and we're creating a story or like an experience in this sense. And it becomes even more meta when you think about how much authorship the player has in the world. Like, your journey is very much your own journey. So that's your story.
Cool, very cool.
Yeah. So it was just funny you mentioned storytelling and like sitting out with the book. That's actually a very like nice mental image that I might borrow some idea from that. As for the comment you otherwise made of like the idea of having just like some sequence, it's so easy to forget that like for a viewer, the relationship isn't as linear as your perception is. So you perceive it to be this linear idea of like, oh, this part happens here in the game, and then it goes on, and this part happens, like, you know all the context around it. But when you take away those contexts, you completely like remove the fabric around it. So what holds it in there is their relationship to it is going to be different, even though like it's the same piece. The best example I have of this happening to myself is when I see like an area being revealed in a game. Like, I remember some of the Sky Islands or some of the islands in Tears of the Kingdom. If you guys have played or seen.
Seen it, not played it.
Same.
Yeah. So I expected us to like journey on among those islands a bunch before hitting ground, or even if we were even supposed to go on ground. I sort of expected us to, but I thought it would be later in the game. But then it happened very early, right? And my entire perception of that space and what it's meant to be in the context of the game changed. And I think that's very powerful.
Yeah, exactly. And something I thought of, that the main character, the little I've seen of him, has a very interesting look that makes you sort of curious about his origin, or who is he, and, you know, what kind of person is this? So just showing off some pictures of that and letting people make their own guesses also, I think, goes a long way. And having people just fantasize about the intellectual property, or, you know, I think that can just do a lot for you, more than gameplay footage could.
Yeah, that's a good idea. Yeah. Up until the open demo part, he was like just this more or less unmarked character, so to speak, just some helmet on a person. But I guess he's become something that becomes sort of like an icon for the game as well. So that's actually like a really good reflection, I think, that you mentioned. The idea of like showing him off in like one armor where he looks like he's on vacation and one armor where he looks like he's out like battling demons, like all of that is like valuable, because you're like, oh yeah, there's fashion, there's a variety of ways that I can play and engage in the world. And in one part it looks like you're on vacation, in one part it looks like you're off battling in some bloody field somewhere.
I should mention that we are sort of running out of time. So, Rune, do you have any more questions or anything before we start wrapping up?
No, I'm satisfied.
Yeah, all right. And before we let you go, so would you like to give us a good pitch why you should wishlist the game, what is it about, anything else where our listeners should go, or how can they keep updated about your project?
So, if you want an experience that harkens back to like very pure experiences that are free of some of the corporate bullshit that exists in the world, if you want an experience that is genuine from like a creation from someone's hearts as creative minds, something that sparks curiosity and invites curiosity, I should say, then I think you should go and wishlist it. It helps us out to get the game out there so that more people like you can also enjoy it. As for our social media stuff, we would love to see you join the Discord. I can provide you guys with some links that you'll find wherever in the text descriptions, wherever that will be.
And where can they keep updated on you and your progress? Do you post anywhere, or do you have any profiles anywhere?
I'd say that the primary one that you would find me posting somewhere on is my personal Twitter account. So I believe it is just Mireneye. That's where you yeah. We also have a Patreon account, even though we're not really actively like engaging that much alongside the Patreon account. It sort of rubs me the wrong way. But it's there for people who are like truly like, I love everyone who's there for their contributions and everything they do. But it rubs me the wrong way to like take money from people unless they actually like super want to support the project. That's where I wanted to go with that. But there is also the Patreon. It's technically like just my personal Patreon. It's not affiliated business-wise with Twin Lake Minstrels. So more of like art and also game development. But yeah, you can find me, like Mireneye is such a unique nickname that like you punch it into like Google or somewhere that I'm absolutely like the top 25 results, and then like everything else might be connected or like some weird links that sort of lead back to me.
All roads lead to Mireneye, I guess.
Yes, yeah. So you'll find that around. You can always check out there's the Twin Lake Minstrels webpage as well. It's a WordPress link.
Yeah, absolutely. We'll make sure to have it all in the description.
Excellent. This is good. I don't have the perfect spiel as an ending yet, so it's good to go through the motions.
Yeah. All right. So, well, I guess with that then, I would like to thank you, Mireneye, for being our guest. It's been very interesting, and we would really like you back for another episode when you have more updates about the game. And thank you so much, Rune, for being my co-host as always. Thank you, everyone, for listening, and we'll see. I will play something from the game as the outro for this episode, so please enjoy this amazing soundtrack. See you next week. Bye-bye!
Bye. Bye.